Imagine you wake up tomorrow in a forest. No phone, no memory of civilization, no one to ask, and you're starving. There's food everywhere. Berries, mushrooms, roots, leaves. All of it colorful, all of it promising. And you have absolutely no idea which ones will feed you and which ones will stop your heart in 20 minutes. You'd be terrified. You'd probably starve rather than guess. But here's the thing. Your ancestors played that game every single day. Except they didn't have the option to starve. They had to guess. And the wrong answer wasn't, you lose. The wrong answer was, you die, and your children die with you. So how did any of us make it? How did a creature with no chemistry degree, no food labels, no internet, and no writing figure out that raw cassava contains enough cyanide to kill you, but cooked cassava is perfectly fine? That the red berries on this bush are safe, but the red berries on that bush are not? That you can eat the mushroom if you find it in autumn, but the same mushroom in spring will destroy your kidneys? The answer is one of the most astonishing survival stories in the history of our species, and most of it is still running, right now, invisibly, inside your body, without your permission. Let's go back, way back, 2 million years ago. East Africa. There's a hominid, short, lean, probably smells terrible, standing at the edge of a forest. And this creature is hungry, not skipped lunch, hungry. The kind of hungry where your whole body is making decisions for you. And all around this creature is a riot of color. Red berries, yellow fruits, dark pods, purple roots, and absolutely no way to know, with certainty, which ones will feed them and which ones will kill them. No food labels, no apps, no grandmother's recipe, just a creature in a world full of gambles. So how did they figure it out? The answer is stranger, more layered, and more deeply built into your body than you have ever imagined. Before any human ever consciously figured out what was safe to eat, evolution had already built a detection system into the body itself. You have wired into your tongue right now 25 specific genes called TAS2RS, bitter taste receptors, that exist for one reason: to identify plant toxins, not to taste complexity, not to appreciate fine wine, to detect poison. When you eat something bitter and your face does that thing, the automatic scrunch, the recoil, the urge to spit, that's not a preference. That's a 2 million-year-old alarm system going off. A study published in 2005 in Current Biology by researchers at Duke University and University College London sequenced that bitter receptor gene TAS2R16 across 997 individuals from 60 human populations around the world. What they found was extraordinary. Specific variants of this gene, the ones that are most sensitive to cyanide-releasing toxins, evolved rapidly and spread through virtually all human populations before early humans even left Africa. The entire species was equipped with this upgrade before it went anywhere new. Think about that. Natural selection was so aggressive about this capability that it became universal, which means the humans who had duller versions of this gene were, simply put, not surviving long enough to have many children. Plants are not passive. They've spent hundreds of millions of years in an arms race against creatures that want to eat them. They make alkaloids, cyanides, oxalates, tannins, chemical weapons deployed inside leaves, seeds, and roots. Bitter is their warning label, and your tongue learned to read it before you had a brain big enough to understand why. That's mechanism number one. Your first line of defense was built in before you were born, before your parents were born, before civilization was a concept. It's ancient, automatic, and almost entirely invisible to your conscious mind. But bitter detection alone wasn't enough, because some of the most dangerous things don't taste bitter at all, and some bitter things are perfectly fine. So evolution had a second trick. In the 1950s, a psychologist named John Garcia was working at a laboratory in San Francisco, studying the effects of radiation on rats, and he noticed something strange. The rats that had been irradiated, which made them nauseous, started refusing to drink the sweetened water they'd been given during the experiment. Even though radiation caused the nausea, even though the water was completely safe, the rats didn't care. They tasted the water before getting sick. That was enough. Garcia had accidentally discovered something that turned the entire field of psychology upside down. What he found was called conditioned taste aversion, now often called the Garcia effect, and it has a set of properties that make it unlike almost any other form of learning that exists. First, it takes exactly one trial, one experience. You eat something. You get sick hours later, not even minutes, hours, and your brain still connects the food to the illness. This is extraordinary because almost all learning requires repetition. You don't learn to ride a bike after one attempt, but eat a bad muscle once, and you might struggle to look at a muscle for the rest of your life without feeling queasy. Second, it's involuntary. Even when you know intellectually that the food didn't cause your illness, say you ate spaghetti before coming down with a stomach virus you'd been incubating for days, your gut doesn't care. The connection is made. The aversion is real. The body overrules the mind. Third, it generalizes. You don't just avoid that one bad mushroom. You become wary of mushrooms that taste similar, look similar, smell similar. The body casts a wide net. This is the most powerful food safety system imaginable. One near-death experience. And you, your children, and anyone watching you would know not to eat that plant again. Ancient humans didn't need to understand chemistry to avoid cyanide. They just needed to eat something that made them violently sick, recover if they were lucky, and let their nervous system do the bookkeeping. The people who survived to reproduce were the ones whose brains made that connection fastest, strongest, and most permanently. Every generation, the machinery got a little more precise. But here's the thing about trial and error. Someone has to go first. And going first in the ancient food lottery sometimes meant dying. So early humans developed a third strategy. They watched, they observed, they copied. In primate and early human communities, social learning around food was essentially the original knowledge transfer. If a group elder had been eating a particular root for decades without dying, that root was probably safe. If a neighboring group member clutched their stomach and collapsed after eating a cluster of purple berries, everybody in that group just got a free lesson, paid for by someone else. Scholars also believe early humans watched animals closely. If a bird ate a fruit, the fruit was probably fine. If a monkey avoided an entire section of forest, there was likely a reason. This wasn't a perfect system. Many animals can safely eat things that would kill a human, and vice versa. But as one piece of an integrated strategy, it was valuable intelligence. The critical thing to understand is that this knowledge accumulated. One generation learned which berries killed people. They told the next generation, through warnings, through demonstration, through the mythologized horror of whoever died eating the wrong thing. Over thousands of years, what started as dangerous guessing became encoded, reliable wisdom. The specific food taboos, the warnings, the recipes requiring elaborate preparation, these weren't superstitions. They were compressed data, stored in story form because humans didn't yet have writing. But here's the part that should make you pause. Every food you eat today, every single one, was tasted first by someone who had no way of knowing what would happen next. The almond. Raw, wild almonds contain enough cyanide to kill a person. Someone, thousands of years ago, found that out the hard way. Cassava, a staple food for 800 million people alive right now, contains hydrogen cyanide in its raw form. The process for making it safe involves soaking, fermenting, and drying. Some anonymous genius worked that out across years of painful experimentation. Elderberries, kidney beans, rhubarb leaves. The list of foods that would kill you unprocessed is enormous, and for each one, there's a story of discovery that history never recorded. The debt humanity owes to those anonymous testers is incalculable. About 1 million years ago, in a limestone cave in South Africa called Wonderwork Cave, which in Afrikaans means miracle cave, and that name turns out to be appropriate. Archaeologists found the oldest confirmed evidence of controlled fire use: burned animal bones, plant ash, hearths deliberately maintained deep inside a cave. Early humans were not just warming themselves, they were changing food. What cooking did to human food safety was nothing short of miraculous. Heat breaks down plant toxins. It denatures proteins that would otherwise cause illness. It kills pathogens. In practical terms, fire turned dangerous food into safe food on a massive scale. Harvard anthropologist Richard Wrangham has spent decades arguing that cooking wasn't just a nice feature of human life, it was the engine of human evolution itself. His argument, detailed in his book Catching Fire, is this: cooked food provides dramatically more available calories than raw food. It requires less energy to digest. And critically, it unlocked huge quantities of food that would otherwise be too toxic or too tough to eat. And then the numbers get staggering. Between Homo habilis and Homo erectus, the period roughly 1.9 to 1.8 million years ago when Wrangham believes cooking began in earnest, human brain size expanded by approximately 42%. Tooth size shrank. The digestive system shortened. The body was rewiring itself around the assumption of cooked food. You didn't just learn to cook, you evolved for cooking. Your body assumed it. Your gut is too short for a raw food diet. Your jaw is too weak. Your stomach acid can't handle everything a chimpanzee handles routinely. We literally cooked our brains bigger. There's one more piece of this story that is easy to miss because it feels so ordinary, so uncomfortable, so mundane. Morning sickness. In the late 1980s, a biologist at UC Berkeley named Margie Prophet proposed something that seemed outlandish at the time. Morning sickness during pregnancy wasn't a malfunction. It was a feature, a deliberate, evolved food safety override specifically activated during the most dangerous window of fetal development. Think about the timing. Nausea and food aversions during pregnancy peaks peak between weeks 6 and 18, precisely when the fetus's organs are forming and are most vulnerable to chemical disruption from plant toxins and pathogens. A Cornell University study published in 2000, analyzing cross-cultural data across dozens of populations, found that women who experience morning sickness are significantly less likely to miscarry than women who don't. Women who actually vomit had fewer miscarriages than women who only feel nausea. The body, at its most vulnerable, turns up the sensitivity on every food detector it has. The things that pregnant women find suddenly intolerable, bitter vegetables, meat, strong smells, are exactly the categories of food most likely to carry pathogens and plant toxins. This is not coincidence. This is engineering. Your body has a layered, redundant, multi-system food safety apparatus that runs completely without your conscious participation. Bitter detection. One trial aversion learning. Social observation. Pregnancy hypersensitivity. Each layer covering the gaps of the last. Here is what the full picture looks like from a distance. Over 2 million years, humans built the world's most detailed food encyclopedia, tested not in laboratories but in the wild, against actual consequences across every ecosystem on Earth. Rainforests, deserts, tundras, coastlines. They documented it not in books but in grandmother's warnings, tribal taboos, preparation rituals, myths about which plants were cursed, ceremonies around the first eating of a new harvest. They stored it in culture because culture was the only hard drive they had, and it worked. Humans successfully colonized every major habitat on Earth, ate hundreds of thousands of different species, developed complex preparation methods to render poisonous things edible, and accumulated a body of food knowledge so vast and so reliable that you can walk into a supermarket, a store containing thousands of things from every corner of the planet, and pick things up with essentially zero fear of dying. That is not a small achievement. That is one of the most astonishing collective intellectual accomplishments in the history of life on Earth. But here is the shadow side of that story. Ethnobotanists, scientists who study the relationship between humans and plants, are now racing against time in the Amazon, Papua New Guinea, and the Congo Basin. Because the elders who hold this knowledge, the ones who know which root to boil twice and discard the water, which bark to combine with which seed to make it safe, are dying, and they are not being replaced. In a single generation, knowledge that took 10,000 years to accumulate can simply vanish, not burned, not bombed, just forgotten, because nobody wrote it down and nobody was left to ask. We are, right now, losing pages from the world's oldest encyclopedia faster than we can copy them. So here's the thing that should stay with you. The next time you eat without thinking, fork to mouth, completely unbothered, totally confident that this is food and not poison, understand what that confidence actually represents. It's not yours. You didn't earn it. You inherited it. Thousands of anonymous people, across thousands of years, tasted things they didn't understand, suffered when they were wrong, survived when they were lucky, and passed the lesson forward. Some of those lessons are stored in your DNA, in the shape of your bitter taste receptors. Some are stored in your nervous system, in the speed with which one bad meal can create a lifelong aversion. And some are stored in the recipes, the food taboos, and the quiet cultural knowledge that says, cook it first, boil it twice, don't eat the seeds. Every meal you've ever enjoyed is built on a foundation of suffering you never had to experience, paid for by people whose names were never recorded. You didn't figure out what to eat. You were handed the answer. The least remarkable thing about your dinner tonight is the food. The most remarkable thing is that you already knew it was safe.